I'm currently 15 years old, so it's been about 7 years since this happened, since I was 8 years old at the time. Now, the story started at a campsite in New Jersey. It's a pretty popular campsite, and I think it was somewhere in the Pinelands area. So one summer when I was about 8, my family and some family friends decided to go camping. We'd been planning it for a few weeks, and I remember being really excited because my best friend at the time was coming with us. We were staying for about a week or two, and it was the third or fourth day. I was with 3 other kids, Dylan, Sophia, and Maddie.
Are you craving warm, creamy, cheesy comfort this week? Grocery Outlet, your extreme value headquarters, has you covered with an amazing deal on Kraft macaroni and cheese. The blue box you know and love, all 7.25.
Now, Dylan and Sophia were siblings, and Maddie was their cousin or something like that. We got bored after eating dinner. I think we had hot dogs and s'mores. Sophia and Dylan brought walkie-talkies, so since there was 4 of us and 2 walkie-talkies, and we were in a safe area, we decided to play hide and seek. Our parents said we could go as long as we stayed within the campground and didn't go past the main road. We decided that we would split into teams, 2 people hiding together and 2 people seeking together. Me and Dylan were on one team, and Sophia and Maddie were on the other. We did rock, paper, scissors to see who would hide first, and me and Dylan lost, so we had to seek. Now each team got 1 walkie-talkie, and I was hiding with Dylan. We got a 5-minute head start to run around the huge campsite. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. It's in Cape May. We had actually gotten pretty far. We were on this road, and right by it, there was just straight woodlands, and there was a few houses there as well, since some people buy vacation homes there. I remember it was starting to get dark, but not completely dark yet, like that orangish sunset time. We were kinda just sitting in our spot on the side of the street for like 10 minutes, hiding behind this big tree. Dylan kept giggling, and I had to tell him to shut up because I thought Sophia and Maddie would hear us. We could hear the walkie-talkie crackle every now and then, but they weren't saying much. I remember feeling pretty proud of our hiding spot because we thought there was no way they'd come out this far. Sophia and Maddie came on the walkie-talkie to ask for a hint. We gave a hint, and after like 10 minutes, they couldn't find us, so they gave up. We were laughing because we thought we picked such a good spot. We assumed they were probably close, so we told them the street we were on, and they said they would meet us there. Dylan was standing up, getting ready to walk back when something weird happened. So all of a sudden, through static, we heard an unfamiliar voice of a southern-sounding old man. He sounded to be in his 50s or 60s, and he said, "I've been listening the whole time, and I know where you live." And then he laughed, like a low chuckle that made my skin crawl. I grabbed the walkie-talkie and asked Sophia and Maddie if they heard that, but they said no, and asked what we were talking about. We tried to explain, but they just sounded confused. We decided to scratch the idea of them meeting us where we already were, and we decided to meet at the lake, which is kind of in the middle of the campsite near the bathrooms. Dylan and I started walking back pretty quickly, faster than we normally would. I kept looking behind us, even though I don't know what I was expecting to see. Dylan and I were still kind of shaken by the weird voice, but we brushed it off as a glitch or something, like maybe someone else nearby had the same walkie-talkie channel or frequency or whatever. I remember Dylan said his older brother told him that happens sometimes with walkie-talkies. Then as we were walking to the lake, we noticed a beat-up red car circling around us a little too much. It was like an older model, maybe from the 90s or something, and it had some rust on it. At first we saw it pass us going one direction, then like a minute later, it came back from the other way. We ignored it and continued walking until the car slowed down right near us. My heart was already beating fast at this point. He pulled up right behind us and rolled down his window, and when he spoke, we heard the same voice from before, that same southern accent. He said, "Hey guys, do you need a ride?" and I remember he was smiling, but it didn't feel like a normal, friendly smile. We didn't waste any more time and we sprinted away as fast as we could. I didn't even look back. I just ran. Dylan was faster than me, so he was ahead. I could hear the car engine behind us, and I thought he was going to follow us, but I just kept running. The man in the car looked agitated from what I saw when I looked back, like annoyed that we ran away. Dylan said he saw him getting out of the car, but I didn't see it. So I'm not sure. I was too busy running and trying not to trip. We found Sophia and Maddie at the lake sitting on one of the benches. We tried to tell them what happened, but they didn't believe us at all. Maddie said we were just trying to scare them, and Sophia laughed and said we were being dramatic. I remember feeling really frustrated because we were genuinely scared, and they thought it was a joke. We walked back to the campsite and didn't tell our parents anything about it. I don't really know why we didn't tell them. I guess we thought they wouldn't believe us either, or we'd get in trouble for going too far from the main area. We continued our day and tried to act normal. I still wonder who that man was, and what he would have done if we stayed in that spot any longer. Like, was he just driving around looking for kids? I also wonder how he got onto our private walkie-talkie conversation. My best guess is he had a walkie-talkie in his car and happened to be on the same channel. But the timing of it all still freaks me out. Was this just a misunderstanding? Or was he actually trying to do something? Part of me wants to believe maybe he was just a weird old guy, but the way he looked when we ran makes me think it was something worse. I never saw that red car again for the rest of the trip. Now, as a host, I think they made a very bad decision by not telling their parents what happened, because that means the creepy old man is still out there, and from what I read, he will probably continue hunting for other kids. So they put other children in danger who just went to enjoy nature. I get they were young and scared of getting in trouble, but if their parents knew, they could have called the police or warned other families at the campsite. And it's terrifying to think how many times this might have happened before or after. This was back in June in Asheville, North Carolina. My boyfriend, our dog, and I were camping along the AT, right by the river we'd been kayaking. We'd just finished for the day, and were trying to decompress at our campsite before making dinner. Now our site was maybe 10 feet from the trail, with the river just beyond that. We'd had a pretty rough day on the water. A couple unexpected swims when we flipped, plus some other stressful moments navigating rapids. By the time we got back to camp, we were exhausted and honestly just wanted to chill out for a bit. The dog was zonked out in the shade, and we were sitting there still in our damp clothes, too tired to even think about starting a fire yet. My boyfriend was already half asleep in his hammock right at the river's edge, and I was sprawled out on a towel near the tent when this guy came walking up, kind of rambling about, giving us his trash. Then I noticed his worn-out backpack and faded AT shirt. Plus he had that look, like the slightly wild-eyed thing thru hikers get. I realized pretty quick he was serious about the trail and just wanted us to take his garbage. Now the thing is, we were only like a 5-minute walk from the trailhead, where there was basic civilization. So I told him this, figuring he'd probably just want to toss it himself if it was that close, right? But then he reaches into his pack and pulls out this huge bag of supplies. He says I can have some if I take his trash for him. I was honestly kind of confused by the whole exchange. Why not just walk the extra 5 minutes yourself? Then he said he'd been on the trail for a couple months now, and he asked if he could hang around and drink a beer with us. I figured sure, why not? This guy seemed like he really just needed to talk to some actual people for a bit. You could kind of tell. Thru hikers get that look after weeks in the woods, like they're starved for normal conversation. He seemed harmless enough, maybe a little trail worn, but normal. Plus, I wasn't doing anything anyway, and my boyfriend was still dozing in his hammock, totally oblivious to this whole interaction. I did think he might have only approached because I looked like a girl who was alone. Maybe he hadn't noticed the hammock tucked by the river, but I figured at worst, he'd be mildly disappointed. Then my boyfriend finally popped his head up at some point, probably wondering who I was talking to. The hiker definitely seemed surprised to see him, which pretty much confirmed my suspicion that he thought I was by myself. Then he started saying stuff like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not one of those creepy people." But also, when someone keeps insisting unprompted that they're not creepy, it kind of has the opposite effect. But still, he seemed relatively harmless at that point. I was trying to be friendly, asking basic questions about the trail and if he had any good stories from his hike. He was answering normal enough, talking about the shelters he'd stayed at, some rainstorms, and the usual stuff. My boyfriend and I decided to smoke in the style of GBS out of the river, which is kind of our thing when we camp near water. We obviously offered some to the guy since he'd given us the supplies in the first place. Would have been rude not to. But that's when things got weird. This guy was being incredibly strange. He just talked and talked and talked, but it was so quiet, we couldn't really hear a thing he was saying. Like his mouth was moving constantly, but it was almost a whisper or mumble. I tried to seem interested and respond to stuff, nodding along, but I genuinely had no clue what he was going on about. He'd just stare at the river talking to himself, then occasionally whip his head around to look at us like we were supposed to be part of the conversation. He also went through like 3 beers and smoked during all this, so we're talking a solid chunk of time here, but this man would not leave. The sun was starting to get lower, and we still hadn't even started dinner yet. Then he started talking to Siri on his phone when we stopped really engaging with him. And he was like genuinely yelling at her and getting weirdly aggressive with his phone. It was bizarre. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, he goes, "On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a psycho?" My boyfriend and I immediately locked eyes, and I could tell we'd both just had the exact same thought, that this situation had crossed a line into way too creepy territory. The vibe completely shifted in that moment. We both did this super nervous laugh, and were like, "Oh, a 1 for sure." After that, I was like, nope, this guy's not welcome here anymore. I climbed into the hammock with my boyfriend, and we kind of just sat there talking to each other quietly, not acknowledging the guy anymore, hoping he'd take the hint. He mumbled something about smoking 1 more cigarette, and then he'd leave. But I swear to God, that was the longest cigarette I have ever witnessed in my entire life. He was taking these tiny little drags, then just holding it, and staring at the river. It felt like it took him 20 minutes to finish it, and I was literally watching it get shorter and shorter, millimeter by millimeter, just silently praying he would finally leave already. The sun was also going down, and our dog had moved closer to us, away from him. Then he finally got up, packed his stuff, and left. And by that point it was almost dark, like the sun was basically setting, so we knew he wouldn't go far before he'd have to set up camp for the night too, and probably just down the trail somewhere. That night we were convinced this guy was going to come back and do something to us, so we kept the dog between us and the tent, and neither of us slept well at all. Throughout the night, people did walk by on the trail multiple times with their headlamps on, but it turned out to be other hikers we'd seen earlier in the day, normal people just heading to the bathroom or whatever. Each time we'd hear footsteps, though, our hearts would just drop, thinking it was him coming back. Then we literally laid there in the dark, planning what we'd do if he came back. The plan was to grab the dog, unzip the tent as fast as possible, and jump straight into the river. We'd float downstream to the boat ramp we'd passed earlier and get the hell out of there. It sounds dramatic, but we were genuinely scared. He didn't end up showing up that night, and we never saw him again after that, but it was enough to seriously freak us out for the rest of the trip. Now it's possible this guy was just socially awkward, and had been isolated in the woods by himself for too long. Trail brain is real, but it's also very possible he had some genuinely creepy intentions. Either way, I'm definitely glad I wasn't alone when he first walked up. It all started when my parents forced me and my brother to go to this summer camp for a week. I really didn't want to go, but sadly you can't do much when you are just kids. Anyway, so I got there first and met my counselor Jake, who seemed pretty cool, I guess. The other kids started showing up, and we played some get-to-know-you game where you say your name and favorite food. Then we headed off to dinner, and the dining hall was loud and crowded, and they served spaghetti that wasn't great, but I was starving, so I ate it anyway. Nothing really happened until the second night, when things got strange. I had fallen asleep, and I had a dream where I was in my sleeping bag, stuck in the middle of the woods. Then I felt myself wake up, but my surroundings didn't change, and I could freely move my body. I started to feel around when my hand touched the cabin wall, and realized I was still in my cabin. It was as if someone glued this place into my eyes. I could hear my bunkmates breathing, and someone snoring across the room. Now as I sat up and blinked hard a few times, but the forest scene was still there, overlapping everything like a weird filter I couldn't turn off. I reached around for my watch, which was difficult since I couldn't even see my stuff. It just looked like the ground in the forest. I found it and pressed the button to light it up, and the light put a hole in my illusion, and I could see the cabin. I stopped and realized my situation and panicked, which woke everyone up. Jake flipped the lights on, and the illusion went away instantly, and everyone was staring at me like I was crazy. I tried explaining what happened, but nobody believed me. Then one kid just rolled his eyes, and another muttered something under his breath. Jake told everyone to go back to sleep and asked if I was okay. I just nodded, but I'm pretty sure they labeled me the weird kid after that. Then the next weird thing happened when it was nighttime and the entire camp was hiking to some building for a campfire or something. I came upon the entrance to the trail, and I saw a girl dressed in white that nobody seemed to notice. She was just standing there, completely still, staring at nothing. As I had to follow the group, I had no choice but to go near her, and as I did, she faded away like mist. It was not alone, though. The entire trail there would periodically be different kids dressed in the same white clothes as the first. Always just standing there, always ignored by everyone else. I counted maybe 5 or 6 of them total and kept my mouth shut this time, because I didn't want to freak out again. It stopped when I got to the end, and in the building everyone was going into was a black mass that nobody noticed. It was just hovering there near the entrance, darker than the night around it. Thankfully, it faded like the others, and nothing else happened the rest of the time I was there. But something stranger than all the other things was that nobody remembered the camp afterwards. My parents and my brother said we never went to that camp, that we stayed home that week. I argued with them, but they looked at me like I was losing it. The pictures we'd been given at the end had disappeared from my bag, and sometimes I wonder if I dreamed the whole thing. But the memories are too vivid and too real. I still don't know what happened that week, and honestly, maybe I don't want to.
Adobe Creative Cloud is designed to be almost like a playground. It's a collection of applications. If you are more like an illustrator,
a 23-year-old woman. I usually don't like calling people creepy because it feels mean. But if someone does something that makes you uncomfortable, I think it's fair to call them that. Now, this happened in October when I went to buy groceries. Maybe it wasn't such a big deal, and I got too worried about nothing. But honestly, it still makes me feel weird when I think about it. So I pulled into the grocery store parking lot that afternoon. It was pretty empty since it was a weekday. I noticed this guy sitting alone in a white car with all the windows rolled down. His car was parked maybe 3 or 4 spots away from where I was going to park. At first, I didn't think much of it. People wait in their cars all the time, right? So I just drove past him and parked at the other end of the lot instead. I was planning to go into the store, but for some reason, I wanted to check my phone real quick before heading inside. So I'm just sitting there in my car, minding my own business and looking at my phone. Then, out of nowhere, someone knocked on my window. I quickly spun around in my seat to see what was going on. Standing right there, practically pressed up against my window, was this old lady, probably in her 70s or 80s. But the weird part was how close she was standing. Like uncomfortably close. She was literally right up against my car door, staring in at me through the glass, and it caught me completely off guard. Then she knocked on my window again. This time she pressed her face right up against the glass, trying to look inside my car at me. I could see her face so close to the window, and it freaked me out. Now knocking on someone's window is already weird enough. But getting that close and trying to peek inside while I'm just sitting there, that's a whole different level of strange. Part of me thought maybe I should roll down the window a little bit and ask her what she wanted. Maybe she needed help or directions or something, right? But something about the whole thing just felt wrong. My gut was telling me this wasn't normal. The way she was acting, the way she kept staring at me through the glass, it all gave me a really bad feeling. So I made a quick decision. I wasn't going to stick around to find out what she wanted. I started my car and drove away from that parking spot as fast as I could. As I was driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw her walking toward another car in the lot. She was holding something in her hand. It looked like a piece of paper, or maybe a flyer. That's when I noticed something else that made the whole thing even weirder. Remember that white car I saw when I first pulled in? The one with the windows down. It was completely empty now. Nobody was sitting in it anymore. So I guess this old lady must have gotten out of that car and walked all the way across the parking lot to where I had parked. And she did all of this while I was just sitting there looking at my phone. The crazy part is, I didn't see her coming at all. I had no idea she was walking up to my car. That's because I was facing the other direction, toward the store while I was on my phone. So she basically snuck up on me without me noticing. It makes sense now why the knock on my window scared me so much. I had zero warning that anyone was even near my car. After I drove away from that parking lot, I made up my mind. I decided to just drive to a different grocery store to buy what I needed. I know it sounds paranoid, but I didn't want to risk running into that same lady again. What if she was still hanging around the parking lot? What if she tried to confront me or ask me why I drove off? And honestly, another thought crossed my mind too. What if I went inside to shop and she did something to my car while I was gone? I know that sounds extreme, but you hear about crazy stuff happening all the time. I feel like maybe I overreacted to the whole thing. My friends might think I'm being dramatic, but I can't help it. The situation really creeped me out. In general, I just really don't like it when strangers walk up to me out of nowhere, especially when I'm not expecting it. It catches me off guard and makes me feel unsafe. I'd rather be overly cautious than put myself in a bad situation. Later that day, I called my mom to tell her what happened. I thought she'd understand why I was so freaked out. She basically told me I overreacted big time. She said the lady was old and probably just needed help with something. Maybe she was lost, or her car broke down, or something like that. My mom made it sound like I was being unreasonable for getting scared of some elderly woman. Then she really made me feel bad when she said I was crazy for driving to a whole different store just because of that one incident. Hearing her say all that made me feel pretty guilty, to be honest. Like, maybe I really did overreact. Maybe the poor old lady genuinely needed help, and I just abandoned her there. That thought has been bugging me ever since. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm totally wrong for how I reacted. The whole thing just felt off to me. And it's not like this is the first time something weird has happened to me. I've had similar situations in the past where strangers approached me in parking lots or other places, and some of those times didn't end well. So I've learned to trust my gut. I'd rather be too careful than put myself in danger. Maybe that makes me paranoid, but that's just how I feel about it. Sorry, this is going to be a long story, but I feel like the backstory and side details are really important to include, because honestly, they're super interesting. So my mom is 56 now, and she told me this story that's always stuck with me. When she was a little kid, she used to hear babies crying constantly, but she never understood where the sounds were coming from, or why she was the only one who seemed to hear them. For context, my mom is the youngest of 4 siblings, so she was the baby of the family. Fast forward years later, she's an adult now, and my grandmother finally told her something she'd never mentioned before. Apparently, shortly after my mom was born, my grandmother had a miscarriage. When my grandmother told her, everything suddenly clicked for my mom. But here's where things get even weirder. My mom and dad have told me countless stories about this apartment they used to live in before I was born. They swear up and down it was haunted by a child's ghost or spirit, something like that. Most of this stuff happened before I came along, though there's one incident that happened later, which I'll get to. I don't remember the exact timeline of when each thing happened, so I'm just gonna tell these stories in order from least creepy to most creepy. Also, I'm literally typing this out at work right now during my break, so excuse any rambling. So one day, my mom was babysitting my older cousin Dennis. He was around 4 years old at the time. My mom was in the kitchen making lunch for them when she suddenly hears Dennis yelling from the living room. She walks into the room to see what's wrong, and he's just sitting there playing with his toys like normal. So she asks him, "Why are you yelling for me?" Dennis looks up at her all confused and says, "What do you mean? You've been calling me. I was just answering you." My mom felt a chill run down her spine because my dad was taking a nap in the bedroom, and there was literally no one else in the apartment.
You're 10 minutes late for work, but you were 20 minutes late yesterday. It's a good day for a good deal at Outback.
Just her and Dennis. Anyway, that's not even the weirdest part. Things would constantly go missing in that apartment. But that sounds pretty normal, right? Everyone loses stuff. But here's the thing. My mom would literally tear the house apart looking for whatever went missing. And then days later, the stuff would just randomly appear in places she knew she had already checked. Like she was absolutely certain those spots were empty before. One time that really freaked her out was when my great-aunt's earrings went missing. My great-aunt had flown all the way from Peru to visit them, and she was really upset when she had to leave without finding her earrings. They'd searched everywhere for them. Then, like 3 or 4 days after she left, The earrings just appeared right there on the kitchen table, out in the open, in a spot where they had all looked multiple times while my great aunt was still there. My mom said there's no way they missed them. The next thing that happened is wild, and it definitely needs its own explanation. Trust me on this. So my mom was going through some old family photos one afternoon. They were all bundled together with rubber bands, the way people used to organize stuff back then. She took the rubber band off one stack to look through the pictures, and when she went to put it back on, the rubber band was just gone. It made no sense, because she'd literally just had it in her hand 2 seconds ago. Right then, the house phone rang, one of those old corded phones that was attached to the wall, and it was my aunt calling just to chat. When my mom hung up the phone and turned back around, she nearly jumped out of her skin. The rubber band was right there, literally dangling in midair, right in front of her face, just floating there at eye level, and then dropped to the ground. My mom said she just stood there staring at the spot where it had been floating, completely frozen. So another time, my parents went out to dinner one evening. They came home, got ready for bed, and when my dad looked up at the ceiling, he stopped dead in his tracks. There were crayon scribbles all over the bedroom ceiling, like a kid had just gone wild with crayons up there. Now their first thought was obviously my cousins. Maybe the boys had done it when they were over visiting. But then they realized the kids were way too little to even reach the ceiling, even with a chair. Plus, they hadn't been over to the apartment in several days. And there's absolutely no way my parents wouldn't have noticed bright crayon marks on their ceiling for that long. They would have seen it that same night, or the night before at the very least. So who drew on their ceiling? And more importantly, how? Okay, so this next one is where things go from weird to genuinely terrifying. My mom was decorating their Christmas tree one evening. She grabbed a box of candy canes to start decorating. My mom's pretty short, only about 5 feet 4 inches, so she had to stand on one of those metal folding chairs to reach the top of the tree. After she finished hanging all the candy canes, she folded the chair back up and leaned it against the living room wall, out of the way. I think she said she needed to grab something from the store, or maybe pick up my dad. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, she was only gone for like maybe 30 minutes, an hour tops. When she came back home and walked into the living room, she literally froze in the doorway. Every single candy cane she had just hung on the tree was gone. Completely gone from the tree. All of them stacked in a neat, perfect little pile on the seat of the metal folding chair, which was now unfolded and sitting in the middle of the living room. My mom said she felt like her heart stopped. She just stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Now, I don't know if there's any connection to this or if it's just a coincidence, but my parents noticed that the really weird stuff seemed to happen more often in late October. Like things would get more intense around that time of year. His next story is the one that still gives me chills every time I think about it. My mom and dad had just gotten into bed for the night. My mom felt something climb onto the bed. You know that feeling when you can sense the weight of something on the mattress. She just naturally assumed it was their dog, Askham. So she started nudging at it with her foot, saying Askham to get down a few times. But whatever it was, didn't move. It just stayed there. So finally she got annoyed and reached over to turn on the bedside lamp. When the light came on, she looked down at her feet, and there was nothing there. But here's the thing, she could still feel it. She could still feel the weight of something sitting right there on the bed. My dad felt it too. They both just stared at the spot for a few seconds, and then suddenly, the feeling was just gone. Like whatever it was had gotten up and left. Now here's what really gets me about all of this. My parents said that when all these things were happening, they didn't really think it was that big of a deal. Like, yeah, it was weird, but they just kind of brushed it off and went about their lives. It wasn't until after they moved out of that apartment that they actually sat down and thought about everything that had happened there. That's when it really hit them how messed up and unexplainable all of it was. Fast forward several years later. My parents had moved out of that apartment, and we were living somewhere else by then. I was about 5 years old, and my younger brother was only 1. We happened to be in the area one day, and my parents decided to drive by their old apartment building, just out of curiosity, I guess. The second we pulled onto that street, my baby brother started crying. Not like fussing or whining, I mean full-on hysterical crying, screaming his head off. My parents tried everything to calm him down, but nothing worked. He cried the entire time we were on that street. But the moment, and I mean the exact moment, my dad turned off that street, my brother just stopped, completely stopped crying. Like someone had flipped a switch. My mom says even I was acting weird and quiet in the back seat, which wasn't like me at all. After we moved out of that apartment, my mom has actually seen ghosts a few other times over the years. Sometimes in our new house, sometimes when she's out somewhere. She's felt presences, seen shadows, that kind of thing. But she says it was never the same ghost twice, always different ones. So anyway, just the other day, my mom and 2 of my cousins decided to go see a medium. So the medium was in the middle of doing a group reading for everyone there, and out of nowhere, she just randomly said my mom's name. Like she wasn't even looking at my mom or talking to her directly. She just said Stacy while she was talking to someone else. My mom's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't say anything yet. Then a little while later, the medium stopped what she was doing, pointed directly at my mom in the audience, and asked, "What's your name?" My mom said, "Stacy." The medium nodded like she'd been expecting that and told my mom to please stay after the show was over because she needed to talk to her. So my mom stayed behind after everyone else left, and the medium gave her a free private reading. She told my mom that during the entire group session, she kept getting bombarded with the name Stacy over and over again. Like spirits were really trying to get through to her. Then the medium started naming specific people. She brought up my grandmother, who had just passed away about a year ago. Then my grandfather, who died way before I was even born. And then my uncle, who had only passed away about 6 months prior. The medium said that all 3 of them were there in the room with my mom, and they all wanted her to know that they're okay, that they're at peace, and they're watching over her. This hit my mom really hard because she had been my grandmother's sole caretaker for over a decade before she died. Like my mom gave up so much of her own life to take care of her. It was just the 2 of them, day in and day out, for more than 10 years. I've never been someone who believes in ghosts or supernatural stuff. I've been pretty skeptical my whole life, honestly. But there have been a few weird things that have happened to me that I just can't explain away. And I really can't come up with any logical explanation for it. So when I was 18, I was living in Savannah, Georgia for college. If you don't know, Savannah is supposedly one of the most haunted cities in America. There are ghost tours everywhere, and people are always talking about paranormal stuff. One night, I was up super late, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning. I wasn't doing anything special, just hanging out in my room, listening to some music. Then out of nowhere, I saw something move. It was a tall, thin, dark shadow, shaped like a person. It walked from the bathroom over to my roommate's door. This wasn't just a quick glimpse. I was actually looking at it for several seconds. I got really scared, but I didn't move. I thought maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. A few moments later, something even weirder happened. I started hearing a deep voice talking to me in a language I'd never heard before, but somehow I could understand what it meant. It was basically saying that it could help me whenever I needed something. Then this image popped into my head, like a creature that was half bull, half man. I couldn't stop seeing it in my mind no matter how hard I tried. Now I was absolutely terrified at this point. My heart was racing and I just blurted out loud, "Go away, leave me alone." The voice went away. The image in my head disappeared. Everything just stopped. I was still shaking though, and I had no clue what to do. I couldn't exactly tell anyone because they'd think I was crazy, right? So the next day I went to this little shop downtown and bought a crystal. I think it was black tourmaline or something like that. The lady at the store said it was supposed to protect you from negative energy and spirits. I know it sounds ridiculous, and normally I would have laughed at myself for buying into that stuff, but I was desperate. I kept it next to my bed from that night on, and weirdly enough, nothing like that ever happened again. But here's the thing. This wasn't the first strange thing that had been going on in that apartment. For weeks before this happened, I'd been waking up with these random bruises all over my legs and arms, but I had absolutely no memory of bumping into anything or hurting myself. Then there was this one time when I was in the kitchen and I literally watched dishes fly off the drying rack onto the floor, like something knocked them off with force. And it wasn't just me experiencing weird stuff. All three of my roommates and I had talked about how the bathroom gave us the creeps. Every time you went in there, especially at night, you'd get this heavy, uncomfortable feeling, like you weren't alone. We'd all mentioned it to each other separately before we even realized we all felt the same way. And that wasn't even all of it. Sometimes we'd be sitting in the living room or in our bedrooms, and we'd hear the shower turn on. Like you could clearly hear the water running. One of us would get up to go check, thinking maybe someone left it on or something. And when we'd walk in there, the floor would be completely soaking wet, like someone had just taken a shower. But the faucet would be turned off, and the lights in that bathroom were constantly turning on and off by themselves. We thought maybe it was just bad wiring at first, but it happened way too often to just be an electrical problem. Now I want to be clear about something. I've never had hallucinations in my entire life. I don't hear voices. I don't see things that aren't there. Nothing like that. I'm a pretty mentally stable person. And honestly, I've had a couple other experiences in my life where I thought I might have seen a ghost or something paranormal. But those times I wasn't scared at all. I was just kind of curious, maybe a little surprised, but not afraid. This time though, this was completely different. I was genuinely, deeply terrified. Like something in my gut was screaming at me that this was dangerous. That whatever this thing was, it wasn't good. I still can't figure out what happened that night. The whole thing was so detailed and real that I have a really hard time believing I just imagined it all. It felt way too vivid to be something I made up in my head. And here's the craziest part. 2 out of my 3 roommates saw the same tall, shadowy figure. One of them had seen it before my experience, but I had completely forgotten she told me about it. Then another roommate saw it after me. I didn't tell her anything about what I saw because I didn't want to freak her out. But then she came to me one day and described seeing the exact same thing. That's when I told her about my experience too. The fact that we all saw the same figure makes it really hard to dismiss as just my imagination.
The last day of school is always a bittersweet moment, filled with excitement for the summer and sadness at leaving friends behind, even if only for a few months. For my friends and me, it was also a day for adventure. That particular year, we decided to explore the old, abandoned school at the edge of town. It was a place we had always been curious about, but never brave enough to visit. The school had been closed for years, left to decay and be reclaimed by nature. Stories about it were passed down from one generation of students to the next, tales of ghost sightings and unexplained noises. We always dismissed them as mere stories, but on the last day of 8th grade, we decided to see for ourselves. It was late afternoon when we gathered our courage and set off. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the deserted building. The school loomed before us, its windows shattered and doors hanging askew. We pushed open the rusted gate, the creak echoing in the stillness. "Are we really doing this?" my friend Jake asked, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. "Yeah, we are," I replied, trying to sound confident. "It's now or never." We stepped inside, the air immediately cooler and filled with the smell of mold and decay. The halls were lined with lockers, their doors ajar, revealing forgotten textbooks and broken pencils. We moved cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The building seemed to close in around us, each creak and groan of the old structure making us jump. Despite the fear, there was a thrill to it, a sense of adventure. We wandered the hallways, peering into classrooms filled with broken desks and dusty chalkboards. It was eerie, but nothing overtly scary, at least, not yet. As we ventured deeper into the school, we found a staircase leading to the basement. The stairs were narrow and steep, disappearing into darkness. A sense of unease settled over us, but our curiosity pushed us forward. We descended slowly, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls. The basement was even more unsettling. The air was thick and musty, and our flashlights revealed strange symbols drawn on the walls. Old furniture was piled haphazardly, creating an obstacle course of sorts. We had to navigate carefully to avoid tripping. In the far corner of the basement, we found a door that was slightly ajar. It led to a small room filled with old, yellowed papers and broken chairs. At the center of the room was a circle of candles, long since extinguished but still standing. The sight of it sent chills down my spine. "What is this?" asked my friend Lily. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't like it." As we examined the room, we heard a noise, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. We froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, and it seemed to be coming from all around us. Panic took over us, and we decided it was time to leave. We hurried back up the stairs, but the building seemed to have other plans. As we made our way through the halls, we saw something that stopped us in our tracks, a dark figure standing at the end of the corridor. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the darkness. "Do you see that?" Jake whispered. We all nodded, too terrified to speak. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching us. We backed away slowly, our eyes never leaving the shadowy figure. As we turned a corner, we broke into a run, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the building. The halls seemed to stretch on forever, and we kept hearing whispers and footsteps behind us. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. It felt like the hallway was miles long. Finally, we burst through the front doors and into the cool evening air. We didn't stop running until we were far from the school, collapsing on the grass, gasping for breath. The relief of being outside, away from that place, was overwhelming. "What was that?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing with fear and confusion. "But I'm never going back there." We made a pact to keep our adventure a secret, not wanting to relive the terror of that night. The abandoned school was eventually demolished, replaced by a new building. But the memory of that last day, the fear we felt, stayed with us. Until this day, I still try to make sense of what we experienced. The whispers, the symbols, the dark figure, it all seems like a bad dream. But we know it was real. We were there, and we felt the fear. The last day of school is supposed to be a time of joy and celebration, a day filled with laughter and plans for summer adventures. For me and my friends, it started that way. We were in 8th grade, eagerly anticipating our transition to high school. The air was filled with excitement as we cleared out our lockers and said our goodbyes. But that day, everything changed in the blink of an eye. After school, a group of us decided to walk home together, as we often did. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind where the warmth of the sun on your skin makes you feel invincible. We laughed and joked, talking about our plans for the summer. I remember feeling carefree and happy, unaware of the dark turn the day was about to take. We took our usual route, a shortcut through a quiet suburban neighborhood. The streets were lined with trees, their leaves casting dappled shadows on the pavement. It was a peaceful area, the kind where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. We were halfway home when a white van pulled up beside us. The van's windows were tinted, and it slowed down as it approached. At first, we didn't think much of it. We continued walking, but the van kept pace with us. The driver rolled down the window and called out, asking for directions to a nearby street. He seemed friendly enough, a middle-aged man with a kind smile. Always eager to help, I stepped closer to give him directions. That's when everything went wrong. Before I knew it, the man had grabbed my arm and yanked me into the van. It happened so fast that I barely had time to react. I screamed, and my friends tried to pull me back, but he was too strong. In a matter of seconds, the van door slammed shut, and it sped off, leaving them in shock and disbelief. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. The inside of the van was dark and smelled of dampness and oil. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with fear. I tried to stay calm, to think of a way to escape, but the man's grip on me was firm. He didn't say much, just drove in silence, the hum of the engine and the sound of rain hitting the roof the only noises. I tried to take in my surroundings, to remember any details that might help me later, but the fear made it hard to focus. After what felt like an eternity, the van stopped. The man dragged me out and into an old, abandoned building. The place was run down, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. He pushed me into a small room and locked the door, leaving me alone in the dark. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I was scared and alone, unsure of what would happen next. I thought about my friends, about how they must be feeling, and a tear rolled down my cheek. I didn't want to die. I kept telling myself that I had to stay strong, that I had to find a way out. Hours passed, each one feeling like a lifetime. The man came back periodically, bringing me food and water, but he never spoke. His eyes were cold, devoid of any emotion. I tried to plead with him, to ask why he was doing this, but he ignored me. The nights were the worst. The darkness was suffocating, and the silence was deafening. I could hear every creak, every rustle, and my imagination ran wild. I kept thinking about my family, wondering if they were looking for me, hoping they hadn't given up. One night, I heard sirens in the distance. My heart leaped with hope. I banged on the door, shouting for help. The man rushed in, his face twisted with anger. He grabbed me, dragging me to another room, but I fought back with every ounce of strength I had. Suddenly, the door burst open, and police officers stormed in. They tackled the man, pulling him away from me. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing with relief. They had found me. I was safe. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, hospital visits, and reunions with my family and friends. The relief of being found was overshadowed by the trauma of what had happened. I had nightmares for weeks, waking up in a cold sweat, the fear still fresh in my mind. It took time, but I started to heal. My friends and family were incredibly supportive, helping me through the darkest moments. The man who kidnapped me was convicted and sent to prison, but the fear never truly left me. The memory of that van, that man, haunted my dreams and changed me forever. It started with little things. I'd see the same person watching me from a distance, but I brushed it off as paranoia. It wasn't until the last day of school that things took a darker turn, transforming what should have been a day of celebration into a nightmare I would never forget. My friends and I were ready for summer, discussing our plans as we walked home together. The streets were busy with students, parents, and teachers, everyone smiling and chatting. It was a perfect day, or so it seemed. I first noticed him standing by the school gate, a man in his late 30s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. He didn't look out of place at first, just another parent waiting to pick up their child. But as we walked past, I felt his eyes follow me. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a cold sensation that crept up my spine. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my friends and our conversation. We planned to spend the afternoon at the local park, enjoying the sunshine and our newfound freedom. We arrived at the park, found a spot under a large oak tree, and settled in. We played games, laughed, and enjoyed ourselves, the memory of the man by the gate fading from my mind. As the afternoon wore on, I went to buy ice cream from a nearby stand. That's when I saw him again. He was standing near the entrance of the park, partially hidden by a tree, his eyes fixed on me. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that he happened to be there, but the unease was growing. I hurried back to my friends, trying to act normal. We ate our ice cream, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced around the park, my eyes scanning the crowd, but he was gone. I tried to convince myself that I was being silly, that it was all in my head. As the sun began to set, we decided to head home. The park was emptying out, the sounds of laughter and play fading into the evening. We said our goodbyes and started walking home. The streets were quieter now, the bustle of the day replaced by the stillness of evening. I walked with my friend Emily, chatting about our summer plans. We were halfway home when I saw him again, standing on the opposite side of the street. He was leaning against a lamppost, watching us. My heart pounded in my chest, fear gripping me. "Emily, do you see that guy over there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked over and frowned. "Yeah, what about him?" "He's been following me all day," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I saw him at school, then at the park, and now here." Emily's eyes widened. "That's creepy. Maybe we should go to your place and tell your parents." I nodded, relieved that she believed me. We quickened our pace, trying to put some distance between us and the man. I glanced back and saw him start to follow us, his steps measured and deliberate. By the time we reached my house, my hands were shaking. We rushed inside, locking the door behind us. I told my parents everything, and they called the police. The officers arrived quickly, but by the time they searched the neighborhood, the man was gone. They took my statement and assured me they would patrol the area, but their words did little to ease my fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise, every creak of the house sent me into a panic. I kept seeing his face in my mind, those cold, unblinking eyes. The fear was suffocating. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. The next few days the police increased their patrols, but there was no sign of the man. My friends were supportive, checking in on me and offering to walk me places, but the fear never left. I felt like I was always being watched, a constant shadow over my shoulder. One evening, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. It was a warm, summer night, and the streets were quiet. I stayed close to home, my senses on high alert. As I turned a corner, I saw him again. He was standing under a streetlight, his face partially obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt. My heart stopped. I turned and ran. I could hear his footsteps behind me, quickening to match my pace. I darted into a nearby alley, hoping to lose him. The alley was dark and narrow, and I felt a surge of panic as I realized I was trapped. I could hear his footsteps growing closer. I hid behind a dumpster, my heart pounding in my chest. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped, and I heard him breathing, slow and steady. "You can't hide forever," he said, his voice low and menacing. I felt a surge of fear. I had to do something, had to get out of there. I spotted a broken bottle on the ground and grabbed it, holding it tightly. My hands were shaking, but I knew I had to defend myself. The footsteps started again, moving away from the alley. I waited. When I was sure he was gone, I slipped out from behind the dumpster and ran home as fast as I could. When I got home, I told my parents what had happened. They called the police again, and this time, the officers took my fear seriously. They searched the area and found no sign of the man, but they promised to keep a close watch. The days that followed were tense. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, constantly looking over my shoulder, always on edge. My parents installed security cameras around the house, and I carried pepper spray with me wherever I went. One evening, as we were having dinner, the doorbell rang. My dad answered it, and I heard him talking to someone. I felt a surge of fear, wondering if it was the man. My dad called me to the door, and my heart sank when I saw who it was. It was the man. He was standing there, a smirk on his face. "Hello, I'm your new neighbor," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. I just moved in next door and thought I'd introduce myself. I felt a wave of nausea. This was no coincidence. He had moved in next door to keep an eye on me, to torment me. I stepped back, my mind racing. My dad, unaware of the man's true intentions, shook his hand and welcomed him to the neighborhood. The man's eyes met mine, and I saw the coldness in them. He knew what he was doing, and he was enjoying it. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I knew I couldn't live like this. That night, I made a decision. I called the police and told them everything. They launched an investigation and discovered that the man had a history of stalking and harassment. He was arrested and charged, and a restraining order was issued. The fear didn't disappear overnight, but knowing he was behind bars gave me some relief. I started to feel safe again, slowly rebuilding my sense of security. My friends and family were there for me, helping me through the recovery. On our last day of school, my friends and I decided to celebrate by spending the evening at our friend Jake's house, playing games and enjoying our last moments together before summer began. Jake's house was an old, two-story home on the outskirts of town. It had a large backyard that bordered a dense forest. We had spent countless evenings there, playing hide-and-seek and telling ghost stories around a bonfire. This night was no different, or so we thought. The evening started off fun. We played video games, roasted marshmallows, and laughed until our sides hurt. As the night wore on, Jake suggested we play hide-and-seek one last time before it got too dark. The idea of playing in the dim light of dusk added a thrill to the game. We set the boundaries, the house and the first few rows of trees in the forest. I was it, so I counted to 50 while the others scattered to find their hiding spots. The air was cool, and the sounds of the forest were loud as the sun dipped below the horizon. I finished counting and started my search. The house was eerily quiet as I moved from room to room, calling out for my friends. I found Emma hiding behind the couch and Jack in the pantry. We laughed and continued searching for Jake, who was always the best at hiding. After searching the house thoroughly, we moved to the backyard. The first few rows of trees cast long shadows in the fading light. We called out for Jake, but there was no answer. We assumed he was hiding deeper in the forest, so we ventured in. As we moved deeper into the woods, the usual sounds of the forest, crickets, rustling leaves, and distant owl hoots, were absent. The silence was unsettling. We called for Jake again, but the only response was our voices echoing back at us. Maybe he went back to the house, Emma suggested. Let's keep looking a bit longer, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We continued our search, but the further we went, the more uneasy we became. That's when we saw it, a dark shadow moving between the trees. At first, we thought it was Jake, trying to scare us. But as we moved closer, we realized the figure was too tall and too dark to be him. Jake, is that you? Jack called out. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it seemed to glide between the trees, its movements unnatural and unsettling. We felt a chill in the air, colder than the night should have been. A sense of dread washed over us, and we instinctively backed away. We turned and started walking quickly back toward the house. The shadow followed us, always just at the edge of our vision. It seemed to grow larger, more menacing, as we neared the edge of the forest. We broke into a run. As we burst out of the trees and into the backyard, the shadow disappeared. We didn't stop until we were inside the house, locking the doors behind us. Where's Jake? Emma asked. We searched the house again, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Fear gripped us as we realized he was still out there, alone in the dark. We decided to call his parents and the police, hoping they could help us find him. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for help to arrive. We huddled together in the living room, jumping at every noise. The police arrived and began their search, combing through the forest with flashlights and dogs. We watched from the window, our hearts heavy with fear and guilt. After what felt like an eternity, they found Jake. He was sitting at the base of a large tree, unharmed but shaken. He couldn't remember how he got there or why he hadn't responded to our calls. The only thing he could recall was a feeling of overwhelming dread and the sensation of being watched. The police couldn't find any evidence of the shadowy figure we had seen. They assured us it was probably just our imaginations playing tricks on us, but we knew what we saw. The memory of that dark shadow haunted us for weeks, casting a pall over our summer. Jake seemed different after that night, quieter and more withdrawn. I always thought the stories about haunted mirrors were just that, stories. Ghost tales to be shared around a campfire or during a sleepover. That was until I found the mirror at an antique shop on a quiet afternoon. It was a beautiful piece, large and ornately framed, with a glass so clear it seemed to draw you in. I couldn't resist buying it, despite the odd look the shopkeeper gave me when I made the purchase. I brought the mirror home to my small apartment. It was cozy but a bit worn, with creaky floors and drafty windows that gave it a certain charm. I placed the mirror in the living room, leaning it against the wall opposite the couch. It added a touch of elegance to the space, reflecting the warm light from the floor lamp and making the room feel larger. The first few days with the mirror were uneventful. I admired it every time I walked past, pleased with my find. My routine was simple: work, come home, cook dinner, watch some TV, then head to bed. But soon, small, strange things began to happen. At first, it was just a feeling of unease, like someone was watching me. I brushed it off, blaming it on the old building and my overactive imagination. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, I noticed a shadow move in the reflection of the mirror. It was just a flicker, barely noticeable, but it made me stop and look closer. I turned around, expecting to see someone or something behind me, but there was nothing. The room was empty, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the sizzle of food in the pan. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But the shadow kept appearing, each time a little clearer, a little more defined. It moved in ways that didn't match my own movements, lingering in the background, just out of focus. It was unsettling, to say the least. One night, while watching TV, I glanced at the mirror and saw the shadow again. This time, it was unmistakable. A dark, humanoid figure standing in the corner of the room, its head slightly tilted as if it was observing me. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I turned to look directly at the corner, but again, there was nothing there. Just an empty space. The occurrences became more frequent. The shadow seemed to grow bolder, appearing more often and for longer periods. I started to dread being in the living room alone, but I couldn't bring myself to move the mirror. It felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that something was truly wrong. One night, I decided to test my sanity. I set up my phone to record while I slept, positioning it to capture the mirror. That night, I slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares of dark figures and cold, empty eyes. When I woke up, I almost forgot about the recording. It wasn't until I was having my morning coffee that I remembered. I played the footage back, heart racing. For the first few hours, there was nothing. Just the peaceful, if slightly eerie, reflection of my living room. But then, around 2 a.m., the shadow appeared. It slowly emerged from the side of the mirror, stepping into the frame as if it was entering the room. It stood there, motionless, watching. I felt a wave of nausea as I watched the figure on the screen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The figure moved closer to the edge of the mirror, then seemed to vanish. I rewound the footage, watching it over and over, hoping to find some explanation, some trick of the light that I had missed. But it was always the same. The shadow was real. I showed the footage to my friend, Lisa. She was skeptical at first, but the look on her face as she watched the video told me she was just as unnerved as I was. She suggested getting rid of the mirror, but something inside me resisted. I needed to understand what was happening. I started researching haunted mirrors, looking for any clue that might explain my situation. I read about mirrors being portals, about spirits trapped within them, about ancient rituals used to cleanse them. The more I read, the more frightened I became. The stories were too similar to my own experience. One night, after another sighting of the shadow, I decided to confront it. I stood in front of the mirror, heart pounding, and spoke aloud. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reflection stared back at me, unchanged. I felt foolish, talking to a mirror, but I was desperate. That night, I dreamed of the shadow. It was clearer than ever, standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It reached out, and I felt a cold hand on my leg. I woke up with a start, gasping for breath. My leg was icy cold where the shadow had touched me. The next day, I decided enough was enough. I had to get rid of the mirror. I called a local antique dealer and arranged for them to take it away. As they loaded it into their truck, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Would the shadow leave with the mirror, or had I only angered it? That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The apartment felt lighter, more peaceful. I began to believe that I had made the right decision. But the peace didn't last. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night to the feeling of being watched. I looked around, but the room was empty. I got up to get a glass of water, trying to shake off the feeling. As I passed by the empty spot where the mirror had been, I saw it. The shadow, standing in the corner, watching me. My heart stopped. It was no longer bound to the mirror. It was here, in my home, and it wasn't going away. I moved out the next day, leaving behind everything I couldn't carry. I never told the new tenants about the shadow, about the figure that watched me from the dark. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wanted to believe that I was free, that I could escape the nightmare. But even now, in my new apartment, far away from that cursed mirror, I sometimes see it. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow that doesn't belong. And I know, deep down, that it will always be with me. Watching, waiting, haunting my every step. It all started with a letter. My family and I had just moved into our dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was perfect, spacious, modern, and nestled in a friendly community. We were thrilled to start our new life there. It was a warm summer evening when I found the first letter in our mailbox. It was addressed to the new owners and contained a single sentence that sent a chill down my spine. "Welcome to the neighborhood. We've been watching you." At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe from some kids in the area. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash, brushing off the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach. Over the next few days, I focused on unpacking and getting settled, trying to forget about the letter. My wife, Sarah, and our two kids, Emma and Jake, were just as excited as I was about the new house. But then the letters kept coming. Each one was more unsettling than the last. The second letter arrived just a few days later, this time with more details. "We saw you move in. Your daughter has a lovely doll collection. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I read it. How did they know about Emma's dolls? The letters were always unsigned, and there was no return address. We started noticing other strange things around the house. At night, we heard footsteps on the roof, the sound of someone walking slowly, deliberately. Sarah and I would wake up, hearts pounding, but when we checked, there was never anyone there. Emma began complaining about someone tapping on her window at night. I tried to reassure her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. One evening, while Sarah was making dinner and the kids were playing in the living room, I decided to install some security cameras around the house. I needed to catch whoever was tormenting us. That night, as I reviewed the footage, I saw it. A dark figure standing at the edge of our yard, just beyond the reach of our porch light. They stood there, motionless, watching. I called the police, but they couldn't do much with the limited information we had. They increased patrols in our neighborhood, but the letters continued. Each one seemed to know more about us, our routines, our fears. We know you check the cameras. It's cute that you think it will help, one letter read. I felt helpless. I couldn't protect my family from this invisible threat. The tension in the house grew, and Sarah and I started arguing more often. The kids were scared to sleep in their own rooms. We were prisoners in our own home, constantly looking over our shoulders. One night, the situation escalated. We were awakened by a loud crash. I grabbed a baseball bat and rushed downstairs to find our living room window shattered. On the floor, amidst the broken glass, was another letter. Did you enjoy the show? I looked outside but saw no one. The police came again, but as usual, there was no trace of the intruder. That was the breaking point. I decided to stay up all night, every night, to catch this person. I sat in the living room, lights off, bat in hand, staring out the window. For several nights, nothing happened. I was beginning to think they had finally left us alone. But then, one night, I saw it. The figure was back, standing in our yard, just staring at the house. I felt a mix of fear and rage. I threw open the door and ran outside, bat raised, ready to confront them. But as I reached the spot where they had been standing, they were gone. No trace, no footprints, nothing. I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I imagining things? Were the letters real? The constant fear was taking its toll on all of us. One morning, as I was about to throw out the trash, I found another letter, this time inside our house. Look in the basement. My heart raced. I hadn't spent much time in the basement since we moved in. It was mostly used for storage. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes we hadn't unpacked yet. As I shone the flashlight around, I noticed a small door at the far end of the room that I hadn't seen before. It was barely visible, hidden behind some old shelves. My hands trembled as I approached it. The door was locked, but I found the key hanging on a nail nearby. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first, damp and earthy, like the air hadn't been disturbed in years. Inside was a small, dark room. The walls were covered in old newspaper clippings and photographs. In the center of the room was a chair, and on it, a notebook. I picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages. It was a diary of sorts, detailing the lives of everyone who had lived in the house before us. The last entries were about us, our daily routines, our habits, even our fears. The handwriting was erratic, almost manic. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The watcher was someone who had lived in this house before us. They were obsessed with it, with the people who lived here. I felt sick to my stomach. I needed to get my family out of there, but I didn't want to panic them. I went upstairs and told Sarah we needed to leave immediately. She didn't ask questions, just grabbed the kids and started packing. As we were about to leave, I found one last letter in the mailbox. You can't escape. I'll always be watching. We moved out that same day. We never told the new owners about what had happened, about the letters, the figure, or the hidden room. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wanted to believe we were safe, that the Watcher was tied to the house and not to us. But even now, in our new home, far away from that nightmare, I sometimes feel like I'm being watched. I'll catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, or hear faint footsteps at night. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know the truth. The Watcher is still out there, and they always will be. It started as a simple camping trip. My friend Lisa and I had planned a weekend getaway to unwind from the stresses of work and life. We chose a remote spot deep in the woods, far from the noise and bustle of the city. It was supposed to be a relaxing escape, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the late summer sun casting a warm, golden glow through the trees. The campsite was perfect, nestled beside a clear, bubbling stream with a beautiful view of the surrounding forest. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and started preparing for the evening. After a simple dinner of roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, we sat around the campfire, talking and laughing. The sky darkened, and the stars began to twinkle above us. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt peaceful, almost magical. As the night wore on, we decided to turn in. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead. I crawled into my tent, feeling a sense of contentment. But that feeling didn't last long. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of crying. It was faint at first, barely audible over the gentle murmur of the stream. I lay still, listening. The crying grew louder, more desperate. It sounded like a child, lost and afraid. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cool night air. The moon cast an eerie glow over the campsite, illuminating the trees and casting long shadows. I saw Lisa emerging from her tent, her face pale and worried. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding. The crying was coming from deeper in the woods. We grabbed our flashlights and followed the sound, calling out to the child. "Hello? Are you okay? Where are you?" The crying led us to a small clearing, where it suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. We shone our flashlights around, but there was no sign of anyone. Just the stillness of the forest, the trees standing like silent sentinels. We called out again, but there was no response. Just as we were about to turn back, we heard it again, this time from a different direction. The crying seemed to be moving, always just out of reach. We followed it, our fear growing with each step. After what felt like hours, we found ourselves near an old, abandoned cabin. It was more of a ruin, really, with its roof caved in and ivy covering the walls. The crying was coming from inside. Lisa and I exchanged a nervous glance. "Should we go in?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated, but the thought of a lost child spurred me on. "We have to," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The air was cold and damp, filled with the smell of decay. Our flashlights revealed a small, cluttered room with broken furniture and debris scattered everywhere. The crying had stopped again. We searched the cabin, our footsteps echoing in the empty space. There was no sign of a child, just the eerie silence. I was about to suggest we leave when Lisa gasped. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a corner of the room. I shone my flashlight in the direction she was pointing and saw a small, dusty doll lying on the floor. It was old, its clothes tattered, and its face faded. There was something unsettling about it, something that made my skin crawl. As I reached down to pick it up, we heard the crying again, this time right behind us. We spun around, but there was no one there. Just the darkness and the cold. "Let's get out of here," Lisa said, her voice shaking. I didn't need any convincing. We hurried out of the cabin and back to our campsite, the crying following us every step of the way. Back at the campsite, we stoked the fire and sat close to its warmth, trying to shake off the fear. The crying had stopped again, but the sense of unease lingered. We didn't sleep much that night, listening for any sign of the mysterious child. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave. The peaceful retreat we had hoped for had turned into a nightmare. As we were packing, I found the doll from the cabin in my tent. I had no idea how it got there, but the sight of it sent chills down my spine. We left the campsite and headed back to town, the doll left behind in the woods. But the crying haunted us. Even after we returned home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At night, I would wake up to the faint sound of crying, always just out of reach. Lisa and I talked about what had happened, trying to make sense of it. We read about other reports of strange sounds and sightings in those woods, but no one had any explanations. The crying child remained a mystery. I don't go camping anymore. The thought of being in the woods, alone and vulnerable, is too much to bear. I still hear the crying sometimes, a reminder of that terrifying night. I'll never forget the fear, the feeling of helplessness, the sound of that lost, desperate child. It was a stormy night, and I was driving home alone. The rain was coming down in sheets, my windshield wipers working overtime to keep the road visible. I had just finished a long shift at work and was eager to get home, sink into bed, and forget about the world for a while. The road was deserted, the only sound the steady drumming of rain on the roof of my car. I was about halfway home when I saw her, a young woman standing by the side of the road, drenched and desperate for a ride. She was waving frantically, her eyes wide with fear. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. She looked harmless enough, and I couldn't just leave her there in the storm. She climbed into the passenger seat, shivering and soaked to the bone. I handed her a towel from the back seat, and she wrapped it around herself gratefully. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think anyone would stop. "No problem," I replied, trying to sound casual. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" She hesitated, glancing out the window. "I was on my way home when my car broke down. I've been walking for hours." I nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy. "Where do you need to go?" She gave me an address that was on my way, and we set off. The silence in the car was heavy, filled only with the sound of rain. I tried to make small talk, but she was distant, her responses short and vague. Something about her seemed off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As we drove, I noticed the temperature in the car dropping. I adjusted the heater, but it didn't seem to make a difference. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, and I shivered despite myself. The woman remained silent, staring straight ahead. We reached a stretch of road that was particularly dark and desolate. The trees on either side loomed like shadows, their branches swaying in the wind. That's when it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her reflection in the window. But it wasn't her face I saw. It was a distorted, twisted visage, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. My heart skipped a beat, and I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep my composure. I glanced at her, and she was just as I had first seen her, pale, wet, and shivering. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, a trick of the light and the storm. But the fear gnawed at me, making it hard to breathe. As we approached a bend in the road, she suddenly spoke. "You should slow down," she said, her voice strangely calm. I did as she said, my nerves on edge. As we rounded the bend, I saw it, a fallen tree blocking the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just inches from the massive trunk. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I turned to thank her, but she was gone. The passenger seat was empty, the towel she had wrapped around herself lying in a crumpled heap. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of her. I got out of the car, the rain soaking me instantly, and called out into the night. There was no response, just the howling wind and the relentless rain. I felt a surge of panic. I had seen her get into the car, felt her presence beside me. Where had she gone? I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and started searching the area, but there was no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Shivering from the cold and fear, I got back into the car and sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. I replayed the events in my mind, but they only became more confusing. I decided to drive back to town and report what had happened to the police. When I arrived at the station, I was met with skepticism. The officer on duty listened to my story, a look of incredulity on his face. "Are you sure you weren't just seeing things? It's a nasty night out there." "I'm telling you, she was real. She got into my car, and then she was gone," I insisted. He sighed and nodded. "All right, we'll send someone out to check the area." But I wouldn't get my hopes up. We get all sorts of strange reports on nights like this. I left the station feeling frustrated and unsettled. I drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of the mysterious hitchhiker. When I finally crawled into bed, I couldn't sleep. The image of her distorted reflection haunted me. Over the next few days, I tried to put the incident behind me, but it kept creeping back into my thoughts. I started researching local legends and ghost stories, hoping to find some explanation. That's when I stumbled upon the story of a young woman who had died in a car accident on that very stretch of road. According to the legend, she was often seen hitchhiking, trying to find her way home. Those who stopped to pick her up would experience strange occurrences, and she would always disappear before reaching her destination. The legend sent chills down my spine. Had I encountered her ghost? I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. But the experience had left a mark on me, a lingering fear that wouldn't go away. I avoided that road from then on, taking a longer route to and from work.